We're all on a journey through this life, and that journey can be quite difficult. It can be extremely hard when we have more questions than answers, especially when it comes to our faith in God. Even though we're on a journey of life, we don't have to do it alone. Join us for the podcast, The Journey, posted fresh on all popular podcast platforms every Sunday morning. Or you can go to the toughquestionsforgod.org website. Thanks, and we'll see you then. Well, welcome back to The Journey, Never Alone. I'm Joe Bevan, and I'm a pastor at Rosebush United Methodist Church.
My name is Ray Francis. I'm the clergy at Farwell United Methodist Church.
And this whole podcast series is all designed for us to look at our life in Christ and how to make it relative, to look at some of the, difficult issues of the Christian faith, as well as the ones that we encounter all day long and every single day. So, again, if you have questions or you have issues or you have even topics that you want Ray and I to talk about, we're all ears. So just online, just send us an email and we'll go from there. And you can do that on the toughquestionsforgod.org website if you want to use that email and so forth. And today we have a special guest, don't we?
Today we have a special guest, Bishop David Bard, and he has one of those titles that I will let you introduce yourself if that's okay.
Sure, I'm glad to. So I'm David Bard. I'm the bishop for the United Methodist Church in the state of Michigan. And bishops in the United Methodist Church are charged with a number of responsibilities. Among those is appointing pastors to their places of service. Unlike some other denominations where the church basically cares for that whole process with perhaps a little help from the denomination, in the United Methodist Church, it's the bishop working with superintendents in consultation with pastors and churches who brings pastors and churches together. We always do that prayerfully in the hopes that those appointments are places where pastors flourish and ministries of churches grow and expand in helpful ways. It's other than that, there's a lot of administrative things involved with being a bishop. I enjoy opportunities like this where we get to talk about the Christian faith and how it's meaningful in people's lives and how we can share that with others. So thank you for the invitation to be with you today.
Awesome. Thank you.
Welcome. We are so glad to have you.
We are.
As a part of this whole idea, we wanted to ask you just a few questions about, for example, what do you see as the future of the church with respect to developing more engagement, more participation from young adults, middle-aged adults? How do we get more people, kind of things?
Well, that's a great question. I think, I start with the premise, and I think all of us who are followers of Jesus start with the premise that the love and grace of God we know in Jesus is something that is for everyone, and we'd like to share that with everyone. We think that lives are somehow incomplete in some ways without knowing God's love and grace. And so we do think we've got something to share that matters to every person, regardless of age and what's going on in their life. At the same time, we think Jesus is the answer to some of our deepest questions, but the exact form those deepest questions take varies from time and place. So, we ask questions now about, how does a follower of Jesus deal with issues in social media? When I was growing up, I still dialed the telephone. I'm guessing you guys did too. So, we had those, there's just different issues that come up in people's lives depending on the context and what's going on in the wider society. So I do think that the deeper questions come in some different forms, and yet we also think that somehow there's an answer in God's love and grace in Jesus Christ. So what we want to try to do is communicate in ways that are relevant to people who may be different generationally. And yet our human experience isn't so diverse that there's not some common, perhaps some kinds of common challenges as we grow and mature as human beings. And so I think, wanting to share God's love and grace begins, I think, with listening deeply. What are the questions people are asking, younger people? Where are the hurts? Where are the challenges? What are they experiencing? And listening really well, not coming in with something just easily prepackaged, but listening and to trying to understand where their hopes and dreams and hurts are, and then talking about how it is we think God's love is relevant to that.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Thank you for that. Having been around sort of as long as you've been in your office, one of those things that I would say is that listening has been a theme of yours as you have progressed in your leadership. And
Thank you.
And I've always found it encouraging, and I've always found it and just instilling that idea of how do we listen to people and then take action about things. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How can young adults, do you think, kind of be brought to and encouraged to be a part of the church movement? What do you think we need to do?
Yeah,
there?
thanks for that question. And let me just add a little appendix to my last one.
Okay.
I think it's also important as we're listening, as Christians in this Methodist stream of the Christian faith, we are learning about Christianity as John Wesley is a central figure to Methodism. And John Wesley believed that God's grace could be at work in people's lives even before they were aware of it. He used that term, prevenient grace,
Absolutely.
which probably isn't an opening line in any conversation you want to have with anybody, unless they've been Methodist for a while. But that so as we're listening, I think we not only listen so that we can come in with an answer, but we can also listen for how it is God's already been a part of that person's life before we were part of that conversation. So even as we think we've got something to share, there are times when we also receive grace in those conversations. So there's a mutuality about those conversations that I think is always important. So we don't come across as just, we've got all the answers and here we're just waiting till you finish talking so I can jump in with my answers. There really is a sense in which the listening is deep and we learn while we listen. For younger people, part of one of the limits of my office is I don't have as much opportunity as I once did when I was a pastor to listen to as many voices from people across the age spectrum. It's not that I don't get a chance to listen to younger people, I do, but often the conversations are more hit and miss, not kind of longer, deeper conversations, the kind that you're able to have as pastors. And frankly, I miss some of that kind of ministry that I had as a pastor. But I think young people want a faith that both helps them navigate what's going on in their personal lives, and a faith that also helps them understand what's going on in the wider world and encourages them to address some of the larger issues in the world. I think even though those topics can be challenging to talk about, I think if we're not willing to help people understand that Christian faith is relevant to conversations about race and about climate, those kinds of issues are on the minds and hearts of a lot of younger people I listen to.
Sure.
And they want the church to care about the wider world as well as care about individuals.
That's quite a change from times past in a way, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, we often talked about, asking people about their personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That matters. That I don't want to eliminate that question. That matters deeply. And I think people want to know, well, so I have this relationship with Jesus. What does it mean in a world where, at least this the scientists I listen to or hear most are saying, the climate is changing, and human beings have something to do about that, something to do with that, and can do something about that. It's a much more, I don't know. So I think our country is more diverse. The world has always been diverse. It's just we're much more knowledgeable about it. With the accelerating communications, we're much more aware of the world around us. And how do we as people deal with that kind of diversity? I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. My graduating class was a fairly large class, 500 some students. Well over 95% were white. So I wasn't confronted as much with those kinds of issues of diversity as someone now in high school would be. And they want to know, well, what does our faith have to do with our relationships with people who are different from us?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
So important.
So just sort of expanding on that a little bit. So what would you tell someone, regardless of age or anything, about what to do and how to go about exploring their faith, regardless of denominations and things like that? What would you tell them about that?
I would encourage them to be open and honest about their questions, to find someone they can talk to and be open and honest about their questions, and not be afraid to ask the questions that are on their hearts. I think the church has not always done a good job of being willing to listen to some pressing questions that people ask. Because sometimes we think, I can't ask that question because it's too. Somebody might think I have no faith at all if I ask that question, and I think to encourage the questions and to be honest in the conversation about those questions is really important.
Okay. I think you're right, because I know when I grew up, that was never encouraged in my experience when I grew up in the church and everything. It was more like, here's what you need to know, and it's not, I don't want to hear from you.
If I could tell kind of a funny story, I was a district superintendent in Minnesota in the late 90s, early 2000s, and the community in which we lived had just one United Methodist Church, and that's where my family went. And my son was in a Sunday school class, and he asked a lot of good questions. And the teacher one time went to my wife and said, I'm really kind of surprised that your son, who's the son of a pastor, would ask those kinds of questions. I'm glad he did.
That's awesome.
Fair enough.
I'm glad that he had the courage and all that to go through and ask the difficult questions. I have a daughter that we adopted. I don't know. She's 18 now. And she has constantly looked at the faith and then struggled with various different aspects of it and asked the questions, not just to me.
Yeah.
I mean, Dad doesn't have all the answers, and I don't. I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But, she's not afraid to ask those questions of whether it's another pastor or it's other members of the church. And I think you're right, Bishop Bard, that, young people today want answers, and they want to see how life and all the things that we experience in life today intersect with our faith. What does it mean?
Yes, I think so too. Yeah, and I think there's a good example of that in the scriptures themselves. If you read the Psalms, the emotional honesty in the Psalms is so refreshing, and people the psalmist makes some pretty dramatic statements about God.
Yes,
where are you?
Yes.
Are you asleep at the wheel here? That's a pretty rough translation. I don't think there's anything exactly like that. But look what's going on. Don't you care?
Uh-huh.
And I mean, that kind of open attitude, I think, is really refreshing and important.
I do.
Wonderful.
Thank
you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that it really speaks to the young people, of course. And I think God is honored by honest questions.
I think so too.
Yeah.
My God is big enough to handle those kinds of questions.
Absolutely. So let me ask you another side of this whole thing here. How do you think what do you think we need to do to maintain relevancy and engagement in our church today as well as in the future? How do we
Sure.
keep real, and how do we keep people engaged?
Yeah. The church has to be willing to change, and almost any very particular change you could suggest may be helpful or not. At one point we were all convinced that if we just changed our style of music and quit playing the organ, that would be really helpful to people.
Yes.
My children are now all in their 30s, and frankly, so part of it is they grew up in the church, but they prefer traditional styles of worship, at least at times, to the person who's up there with the guitar and drums. I mean, it just so I think, and yet for some people that's really meaningful. I think so to prescribe an A, B, and C, I'm not sure I could do that really easily. But again, it's listening. It is being willing to change. It's any group of people over time develops certain ways that they do things, and it becomes comfortable. And to be willing to get out of our comfort zones is going to be really important as we try to make sure that people of all ages have spaces in our churches.
Well, a lot of people don't like that word, to get out of our comfort zone,
No, they don't. I think in a sermon I talked about the grace of discomfort, and I think there's some good grace in discomfort, because we don't change. We don't change if we're not uncomfortable at times, and there's always things in our lives that need some changing.